Welcome, everybody. I'm Marie Cox. I'm the director for the South Southwest Prevention Technology Transfer Center, or PTTC. And I will get us started. Just to acknowledge that the PTTC work is funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, but that we don't directly represent SAMHSA or their opinions. So today I will introduce our speaker. We'll get an overview of the topic. We'll talk about some principles for accessibility in designing materials, some do's and don'ts, some resources, and then please stay around to complete the session evaluation. That's really helpful for us to get that feedback. So we are so lucky today to get Rachel Karch as our presenter. She is the instructional design and accessibility manager for the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, also funded by SAMHSA, which is housed here at University of Oklahoma as well. And so she has extensive experience in design and in ensuring that materials and resources are accessible. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to Rachel so we can get started.
Thank you, Marie. Can you guys hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up on that camera. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. Yeah, first I just wanted to start off with the fact that I am still kind of getting over one of those terrible summer coughs. So every now and then I might just mute and do a little and get some water. And I apologize for that, but thank you for your patience as I'm still healing. Um, it just seems like one of those things that won't go away. It's been with me for like a month, I feel like. Also, you might notice that my hair is a different color. I change it all the time. I have red here, blue today. Next time you see me, I might have pink or green. I just like to make it fun every now and then. But you guys, I'm so excited to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us this probably hot morning wherever you're at. We got a nice cool 85 where I'm at in Oklahoma. So that's a like, nice break for us. Well, all right. So I am going to cover the learning objectives for today. First, we're going to go over describing the importance of adhering to accessibility. And we're going to go over the POUR principles. Those are principles directly related to accessibility, created by WCAG, which we'll talk about. And then I'm going to show you some examples of accessibility, like accessible design and inaccessible design, and also share those do's and don'ts, which people have shared with me that those are really helpful. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of those. So uh, first thing is first, we need to know what the goal of accessibility is. So the goal of web accessibility is to provide equal online access and opportunities to everyone, ensuring that the web is a universal space where all users, regardless of their abilities, can engage fully and effectively. And before we really get into the content, I do want to open up a question to you guys. From what you know right now, and yes, I've given you this lovely definition, but I do want to ask you guys, why do you think accessibility matters? Why does it matter in your job specifically? You're welcome to unmute and talk. If it's easier, you're welcome to type it in the chat and Marie will share it with us. I'm seeing some really good comments in the chat already. And Jesse, I see that you have your hand raised. Jesse, you're welcome to unmute and share your thoughts.
Hi, everybody. So the way that I think about accessibility and why it matters is because everybody has accessibility needs. and the difference between what we term accessibility and the way that society is structured is that some of those needs are normal, quote unquote, normal and normalized, and some are seen as extra or excessive, and that requires categorizing people into higher or lower classes. And so if we think of people as being all people who all deserve access to things like the internet, then it's no longer an issue of, should we do this extra thing? But it's like, what can we do to ensure that everybody does have access? And it's like, I think of it as a human rights framework and a justice framework.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such a good point that you made that it's not an extra step, right? It's a necessary step. It's part of the process. It's not something we just do because we have extra time, right? Thank you so much, Jesse. And some other points in the chat, we've got like inclusivity provides equity. Absolutely. Extends options for information, provides, yep, information in an equitable way, promotes connection and learning. Oh, I love that. Promoting connection. Absolutely. Gives people more opportunities. Yes. Oh, make sure prevention is ethical. Absolutely, you guys. Really good points. Thank you so much. Yeah, and everyone benefits from accessibility. Um, that's a comment that was put last, and that is so accurate in so many ways. And we benefit from accessibility all the time. So even like our speech to text on the phone or listening to text messages when you're driving, all of those are accessibility features originally, but we kind of use them as commonplace now. So in a nutshell, and this is really what all of you guys have already said, but why does accessibility matter? It ensures accessible and functional resources for all users. It promotes inclusion and expands the potential audience for web content, um, which is vitally important to a lot of the stuff that we work on. We need to make sure that our audience is as large as it can be and as needed. It drives innovation and provides universal benefits. It's essential as society ages, and it builds a more equitable world. And here is a quote, just to kind of start us off. The complex interplay of social, economic, and health factors associated with disability are also risk factors for substance use, unhealthy use, and addiction. Disability stigma and stereotypes are common around substance use by disabled people and their ability to engage in treatment and recovery. So that is definitely why we are focusing on it with our specific jobs, right? I want to make sure that everybody who needs our services are able to access them. Here are the POUR principles. There are 4 of them. POUR stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And I really like the word pour in a way with POUR, because it's like kind of like you're pouring into people, you're pouring in these resources to people. I just kind of like that idea, filling up an empty cup. Wanda has put a resource document for you guys in the chat that you're welcome to look at as we go through the POUR principles. And it gives you an outline as we go through them. So the first one that we're going to go over is perceivable. So perceivable, excuse me, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you guys exactly what these mean first before I go and give you those solutions. So perceivable, we want the user to be able to identify content and interface elements by means of the senses. So that can mean like sound, by touch. It could mean visual, operable. They can use whatever controls of navigation that they prefer. So it should be able to be accessed with a mouse, should be able to be accessed with a keyboard, whatever other type of assistive technology that they need. Understandable, users should be able to comprehend the content. So it needs to be in a consistent presentation format. It needs to have headers and paragraphs that make sense and things like that, which we'll get into a little more of. We also want to make sure that the content is robust so that it can be interpreted reliably with a variety of users and whatever interfaces or programs that they're using. So even like different browsers that they could potentially using. And so the next couple slides, I'm going to go into each of those. So perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. We're going to talk about solutions that you can add to your practice to make sure that you're meeting these core principles. Sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself there. But for P, perceivable, the possible solutions for you to make your content more perceivable are using text alternatives, using time-based media, making sure that the content is adaptable, and that it's also distinguishable. One of the most common things that you probably hear when you're making content accessible is alt text. Like make sure you use alt text or text alternatives. Alt text is probably the first thing that you'll find when you look up web accessibility or how to make content accessible. And really what that is you're just providing a text alternative for non-text content. So if you have an image of, let's say, a, a black pug or something like that, that's what you would say, a black pug with a birthday hat on his head, whatever the image is. The other thing is that you want to make sure that your text alternatives are relate to the content. So a lot of the time when we're sharing content in our positions, we're sharing um really we're sharing we might have like a visual that doesn't necessarily relate to the content, but we might also have charts that really relates to the content. So if we had an image that's just some hands maybe like shaking at the beginning, that is a nice visual to have. It looks good, but it's not necessary to the content. So if you had a text alternative for that, you can really just put something simple like decorative if it's not important to the content itself. If it's important to the content, you want to make sure that you describe why it's important to the content and how it relates. You also don't want to make it too long. So there's a lot of different little advice and guidelines and things like that for text alternatives. It just really depends on the content itself. Some people prefer that the text alternatives are longer and more descriptive, but really when we're trying to get out necessary content, we want to make sure that it is concise as possible. The next thing is time-based media. We want to provide alternatives for like videos or podcasts, anything that is difficult to, it'll just keep going if you don't like press a pause button. We always want to make sure you have a pause button. You'd be surprised back in the day, I guess, when everybody had MySpace, you'd go on their MySpace and just automatically play music. Things like that we want to avoid. And I think I remember in those days, I would even take away that little video or the little player so they would be forced to listen to whatever song I had selected. But definitely don't want to do things like that. We want to make sure that people have the opportunity to pause it, to rewind it, to review it, but also be able to read it because not everybody is able to just listen the entire time, right? So we want to have um, transcripts and captions as well. We want to make sure it's adaptable, and you can do that by presenting content in different ways. Sometimes I'll see a course, for example, that has a lot of visual data, but it's difficult to perceive without like a text next to it. So it might have like a handout that shares information that people can tab through. So you can give like a simpler layout. If you have something that's really complex to look at, you can also have something next to it that um, is easier to navigate through. Usually that's not the best practice, but it is something that you can do. The best practice is just to make it all accessible right from the get-go. And at least as accessible as possible as you can possibly make it. The other thing is distinguishable. Make it easy for users to see and hear content by separating the foreground from the background. That is also includes like audio as well. We want to make sure that the background isn't super noisy when somebody is having a discussion or something important to say. I've seen that in videos that are like at conventions and things like that. Before I move on, I do want to pause for a moment and see if you have any questions about these specific perceivable um, principles or principle, I guess, it's just one. Rebecca said, or have the ability to both read and listen to it at the same time. Yes, absolutely. Jesse, yes, you have a question.
I was typing this up, but it'll probably just be faster to say it. But I'll probably still also put it in the chat. One of the ways that I think about balancing, like, especially for alt text, the need to be descriptive with the need to be succinct is by considering how much information I would otherwise be expecting the image to convey and in how much time. So, like, is it a glancing image where it's really just a few key details are what's important about the image? Then just do a few key details, right? If it's something that people are actually otherwise expected to inspect and like consume with a lot of intention, then maybe some more description. So like just because somebody can spend a long time looking at an image doesn't mean that they're supposed to. And so I think it's the same way with alt text,
Yeah.
right? Are you being faithful to the intent of including the image? Because that's what it means to include the other people too, right? Who can't see the image.
Yes, you worded it so much better than I did, Jesse. Thank you so much. But yeah, that is so correct. Like, what is the intention of that image, right? So like, for example, you might want a really descriptive um alt text if they're looking at a piece of artwork from Leonardo da Vinci, right? You would want something really descriptive. Uh, if we're looking at the first slide of this slideshow that had a little light bulb on it, that doesn't really need a lot of um, alt text, right? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jesse. You keep chiming in. I love it.
Oh, I'll keep doing that if it's
Okay.
if it's welcome.
Absolutely. And everybody is welcome to. And you're still welcome to put stuff in the chat too. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one. If you do come up with any questions as we're going on, we need to backtrack a little bit. That is okay too. Okay. Oh, for operable. So here are the possible solutions. The first one is to make sure that it's keyboard accessible. Make all functionality available from a keyboard. And one of my favorite things to do, I wouldn't say it's my favorite things to do, but I actually just don't use my mouse. I just disconnect it. Just disconnect it. Don't rely on it and test out all of my resources that way. You'll be surprised how interesting the keyboard will react to different things. Depending on how content is organized, it might skip around. And I will show you an example of that later. But you want to make sure that when users are tabbing through it or using arrow keys, depending on how they want to use their keyboard, that they can access all the content that they need. Enough time. We want to make sure that users have enough time to read and use the content. That means time-based games are not preferred. We don't want to challenge people in that way. You want to make sure that people can pause things, right? Also, we want to avoid seizure triggers. You don't want to design content that is known to cause seizures. You'll have to kind of look that up. I know that a lot of people have a pretty good of idea now what could cause that, and it's usually flashing. So anything that flashes very quickly is not okay, and anything that that is like usually like a GIF that moves around quickly is usually not the best way to put your content there. So usually people who are making accessible content, they generally avoid GIFs or GIFs, whatever you guys prefer me to say. I've always said GIFs, so. You also want to make sure that it's navigable. So you want to help users find content and determine where they are in a resource. So that means you want to use like table of contents appropriately and make sure that they are linked appropriately. A really big thing that you want to do is make sure that your headers are appropriate and that the content below the headers make sense and they relate to it. And it's a super easy thing that you can do starting today. Make sure that your headers make sense. Okay. So for operable, any questions or comments for operable? Okay. All right. I guess you guys are all going to unplug your mouses today. Just keyboards today. I'm kidding. It's quite the challenge, but it's kind of fun. It really is kind of fun. All right. Well, I will keep going. So the next one is U for understandable. We have a pretty good understanding of what understandable means, right? But really, we want to make sure that it's readable. So you want to make sure your content is legible. We want to make sure your content is easy to comprehend and to digest. You also want to make sure that you have text that is large enough. You want to make sure that your text has enough contrast from the background. You also want to make sure that as people are moving through your web page or your content or your resources, that it operates in predictable ways. We don't want to surprise anybody. And you want to make sure that it looks consistent. And then input assistance. You want to help users avoid and correct mistakes. Uh, the best thing is just to provide clear direction and instruction as people move through content, especially if you're making like learning material or learning content, just make sure that you have very clear instruction. Yes, and then just you saying like high contrast colors that create an optical illusion of motion. So like, those kind of like things that kind of trick your eyes where it's like, oh, is the dot black or is it white? It's a trick of the eye. Those can cause seizures as well, just because it causes movement. It looks like movement. So it's just rapid movement that can cause it. Okay. Any questions about understandable? Do you feel like you understand understandable? Any comments?
I think one of the things that's tricky about understandable is when considering like different neurotypes and also developmental disabilities, it's
Mhm.
hard to be able to predict everything,
Oh,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Um, and so I think this is especially where like humility comes into play when thinking about accessibility because there is no perfect solution. And so it really is going to depend on engaging with your audience and seeing what their needs are and then adapting to those needs. Um, and being open to lots of different ways of knowing and understanding things.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many different ways of knowing and so many different ways of learning. Um, and like you said, Jesse, there's no way to predict all of that, but what we do is we just make it as accessible as we can, as accessible as we can. It's never going to be perfect, and there's always going to be new things that we learn. There's new research every day. I'm constantly learning new things to make my content more accessible.
And I think this also points to the necessity of collaboration, right, with people who like to ensure that we're not being patronizing and paternalistic, right? Of oh, we're doing this for you. It's like no, let's do this together because we all deserve a world where we have access.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Jesse. Alrighty. Robust. Robust. Test with different browsers and devices. So when you're looking at content to make sure it's accessible, you want to test on like Chrome, Firefox, Safari. Those are like, it's not Safari anymore, is it? I'm not even like, what is it called right now? Our internet, not Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, right? You want to make sure that you use as many different browsers as possible. And you want to use like your desktop, tablets, smartphones, and just see what it looks like with accessible content. Sometimes people don't realize that uh, you can invert it from like night mode to like day mode, and it changes the color and contrast of everything. So you also want to check that and make sure that everything is legible from that standpoint. Because some people get like migraines and things like that with bright colors, or white backgrounds. It couldn't give them migraines. So they'll put their stuff into night mode and it reverses the colors for them. Um, you also want to test with assistive technologies. So you want to use your screen readers, magnification software, voice recognition tools to test everything as much as you can. Um, and really, there's a lot of cool tools out there for you to easily check it. And I have a resource for you at the end of this presentation, but there is a tool called Wave that you can just put in your browser, and it tests the website for you pretty quickly. It's not a full review or a full check, but it does give you a good starting point. Any questions about robust? Okay. All right. I am moving on to the next part, which is real world accessibility examples. And Jesse was saying, I nearly exclusively use dark mode. And the number of times an app has a glitch where the text color is inverted. Yeah. Yeah. It's more than you think. Yeah. It's a surprising amount. You're like, oh, because I end up using dark mode quite frequently myself. Just not necessarily because I need it, just because I think it looks slick. But yeah, thank you so much, Jesse.
Yeah, like replies and forwards and Outlook get real funky. Get
Yeah.
real funky.
Yes, absolutely. Um, just kind of showing this graphic I made just as an example for you guys how important contrast is. And this little, even a little light can make a difference in the dark. So we want to make sure that our contrast is looking good. But also, I just like the quote itself, even a little light can make a difference in the dark. And if we are making our content as accessible as we can literally be saving lives, we letting a little light in at a dark time for people when they need it. I'm going to go over these do's and don'ts. Um, these are not, I want to be clear that these are not the only things that you can do. These are just kind of um, ideas for you to start looking into incorporating into your own practice. I don't want you to think that this is the only things that you need to do. There is a lot more research. There's a lot of things that you can do differently. But these are really the basics and kind of a baseline to begin some of these practices. So the do's and don'ts of accessible design. First, use simple colors. Try to avoid using bright or neon colors because they're just hard to perceive, and sometimes they can even cause um, migraines, they can cause seizures and things like that, especially if they scroll through it kind of quickly. Neon colors can cause issues. You want to write in plain language. Don't use figures of speech or idioms. I think a lot of us are probably used to hearing that. No matter what audience you have, even if you're like, I have an audience of people who have um, PhDs, right? We still need to make sure that we're not using idioms or figures of speech or things that are difficult to comprehend. Yes, and they can be overstimulating. I agree with Vanessa. I'm like, oh, this is a lot to look at. Uh, you want to use simple sentences and bullets, and you want to avoid creating a wall of text. That is something that I often encounter is a long wall of text. It's like reading a book. When we're getting through learning material or content on a website, we're not reading a novel, right? We need to split up our content to make sure that it's easy to digest. You want to also make sure that your buttons are descriptive. You don't want to make them vague or unpredictable. So, for example, you don't want a button that just says, click here. You want to describe what that link does. You also want to, which is actually really nice that Microsoft has done. If you copy a link and paste it, it'll just have the title of that link rather than the um, the long HTTP, that whole thing. That is best practice to not just have that long URL and to have a title that they can click. But make sure they know, please, click on the following link to access more materials about accessible design. something that's very clear and precise of what's going to happen when they click on that button. Can you imagine, going into a website and not knowing what these buttons do? If it just says click here, I would be afraid I was clicking on a virus or something like that, right? So just be very clear. You want to build simple and consistent layouts. You want to make sure that they're not complex and cluttered. Uh, you might see websites that just have like, I always want to go back to example. I'm like, oh yeah, remember MySpace back in the day? But you want to make sure that everything is um consistent. You don't want to click on one page and then it looks completely different on the next page. Because then it feels like you've gone to a completely new website and they'll feel like they've maybe been lost or they went the wrong direction. Uh, you also want to use still images or accessible video. Do not use flash animations or GIFs. Okay, that's the first list of do's and don'ts. There are more that I'm going to go through. Do you have any questions about the ones that I have covered already? Yes, Jesse, you have raised your hand.
So I actually have a question this time.
Okay,
Can you give us an example of like the context for these recommendations? Like, oh, is my video not working? Uh,
that's okay. It's
it's
not,
fine.
yeah, it wasn't
Uh,
loaded.
that's weird. But so like, because I can think of lots of contexts where sometimes these things are appropriate, sometimes they're not. But so, given what our audience is,
Yeah,
what is the context in which we're going to be applying these design principles?
that's a good question. And you're right. It does depend on, it can, depending on some of these, I wouldn't agree with all of them, but some of these, um, it might be appropriate. But to get, really, it's to deliver learning content, right? Like what type of thing are we trying to teach people, or what kind of resource are we trying to give people to help others? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So when we're conveying information,
Yeah,
um,
conveying important information. Yep. If it's like it's really quite different if we're talking about like a art piece or like a gallery or like a book, it'd
mhm,
be very different.
yeah,
Yeah. I do think like if it's, for example, you have flash animations, right? And you need to have flash animations because you're you're doing the history of gifts or whatever it is, right? Um, then it's really a good idea to just provide warning for people, right? Hey, this content could potentially cause this, right? So you could do some warnings or things like that, or provide an alternative, right? So, yes, we're going to talk about GIFs. It has flash animations on it. Here is a here is a document that doesn't have any moving pictures or something like that. Um, but yeah, just providing another way to look at it would be good. Does that help answer your question, Jesse?
yeah, yeah. Because I'm also thinking of like, how do we write in a way that is effective?
Mhm.
Because so I very much agree with, figures of speech and idioms that depending on the context, they're not appropriate for multiple reasons, both for like, you know, English not as a native language reasons, as also neurotype reasons. Um, but I also, there's this tendency to think of the opposite or to think of plain language as like dry language.
Yeah,
And information that isn't read because it can't hold your attention is also not effective. And so there's another balance that needs to be struck as well.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's difficult balance. I think it does depend on the context too. And if we're there's also you can also like use idioms or figures of speech, but explain what they mean as well.
For
You
sure,
know?
for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of the time it'll be like, oh, here's a figure of speech and this is why I'm using it and this is what I mean by it. Um, that's probably the best practice. Or you're teaching to somebody or like a group of people that's like a small work group and you guys have a quote like or an idiom that you all know. It will be different. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much again, Jesse. Okay. The next, we're gonna keep on going. We got some more do's and don'ts. Uh, do use images and diagrams to support text. What you can avoid, but you're going to avoid using large blocks of heavy text, and you'll see that probably as a don't as I continue on how important it is to not use large blocks of text. Uh, use two ways to emphasize a point. So when you are wanting to convey something that is important, a lot of the time I'll see people using bold, like they'll bold it, which is perfectly fine. But you want to use a second way to do it. That's best practice. So you can bold it and italicize it, or bold it and underline it, or bold it and make it another color, an accessible color. Don't make it red. But just using two ways is a really good way to emphasize a point because not every assistive technology can read bold. Not every assistive technology can read italics properly, or depending on the program or the server that you have chosen to make a website or anything like that, you um they might not be able to read those types of things. So you just want to do it in two different ways. And it also is a very good visual indicator for people who might have cognitive struggles when reading text. Another thing you can do is consider producing material in other formats like audio or video. If it's possible, it's always good to do both. You never want to force users to remember content from previous sections and uh, give reminders. You want to be able to give reminders and prompts. It could look different for certain learning material. That's kind of that caveat. Like I'm sure Jesse might chime in. It depends on the content. It always does. It really depends on what you are presenting and what the goal and the objective is. Uh, you do want to keep content short, clear, and simple. Align the text to the left and keep a consistent layout. You don't want to have lengthy text again or make it complex or convoluted. You also want to let users change the contrast between the background and the text if possible. That's that dark mode, light mode that we were talking about earlier. And you never want to be restricting how users digest content. You want to make sure people have as many options as possible. Um, Yeah, and so I would create worksheets for program participants and sometimes use videos. Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's awesome. Yep, and Jesse will talk about tags a little bit as we go. Okay, and I don't want to run out of time, so I'm gonna pick up speed just a little bit, and you guys just stop me if needed, okay? So, designing specifically for users with low vision. You do want to use good color contrast and readable font size. Um, Normally you might see like Word automatically will start at 11 or it'll start at 12. Usually you want to go 12 or higher, okay? 12 point or higher. Um, using good color contrast. You don't want to use a small, the opposite of that, low contrast, small font size. You do want to use a combination of color, shapes, and text. Do not only use color to convey meaning. It's really important to not only use color to convey meaning. Not everybody can perceive color the same way, and everybody sees color a little bit differently. So you might see red in a different shade than I do. Um, and then you want to follow a linear, logical layout. You don't want to spread content all over the page. And you want to put buttons and notification and context. You don't want to separate them from their context. So that's what we had talked about earlier, about being very clear about what those buttons and notifications really mean if they interact with them. Any questions about low vision?
Rachel, we had one question about left alignment.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
uh,
I was just curious, can you just kind of explain why left-aligned text is easier to consume and more accessible compared to like, centered text?
Yeah, it's really just because it's easier to perceive it. When you center it, it's usually predicted to be like a title or it could be like a header. And sometimes, depending on what you're doing, that's okay. But like if you're taking all of your text um below and centering all of it, it's harder to, yeah, perceive, digest where the beginning of it, where the end is. It's also fairly difficult for people with dyslexia to read it. Um, but yeah, there's various reasons like that.
That's so helpful to know. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, of course. Okay. And then designing for users of screen readers. So people who um, use screen readers might be blind or they might just be temporarily blind. They could also just have low vision, or people that just might not be able to um, read easily themselves. They might use screen readers to assist them. So with screen readers, you want to describe images and provide transcripts for video. You do not want to only show information in an image or video. You want to make sure that you provide text for that. You do, again, to help people with screen readers, follow a linear and logical layout. And I know that we've said that a couple of times. Um, Again, don't spread the content all over the page. You want to present consistent content using clear hierarchical structure. And what I mean by that is when you're writing documents or writing content on a web page, whatever you're doing online, you want to make sure that you're using headers, but you want to use like title, header 1, header 2 below that, header 3 below that. You want to make sure that your headers are labeled correctly. When you're making a document, let's say in Word, because that's when you're going to come into this situation where you want to make sure your headers are correct, or definitely like in Word documents or PDF documents, you can actually use a really nice feature in Word that's an accessibility check. When you go to like save it, you'll see right a panel right there that'll say accessibility check, and it will definitely check your headers for you and help give you tips on how to do so. But yeah, so when I'm talking about hierarchical structure, it's using appropriate headers. You do not want to rely on text size for headers. You don't want to just make it bigger and bolder and change the color, because that's not going to matter. to a screen reader. They're not going to see that. They're not going to know that. So yeah, making it bigger is just not, it doesn't work. You do want to build for keyboard use only, and you never want to force the mouse or our screen use. You need to make sure that people can use a keyboard even on a tablet, even on a phone. People can use keyboards. You also want to be able to, you also want to write descriptive links and headings. We've already talked about descriptive links. Again, you want to be descriptive with your headers. A lot of the time I will see headers that will be like a question, which is sometimes okay, depending on the context, because you're going to see on the next slide that it has a question as a header. But often, without context, and you start with a question, it's difficult to understand exactly what is going to be below that content. So you just want to be very clear. Like designing for users of screen readers is a great example. You also want to make sure that you use headers that are different. So in PowerPoints, a lot of the time I will see the header of a slide the same for multiple slides. It might even be for like 20 slides, it's the same header. But you want to make them all unique because that is how people are able to figure out where to find the content that they need. So for example, I'll go back. We have the do's and don'ts of accessible design. The do's and don'ts of accessible design continued, right? It doesn't have to be complex, but we do know that that's the second slide of that information, correct? Okay. So the other thing, yeah, you don't want to be unclear with links and headings. Do you guys have any questions about this content that I've shared with you about designing for users of screen readers? All right. Awesome. Okay. So here's that question header. I'm going to make you guys say something. What will you change? Now that you've seen the do's and don'ts, which don't are you guys going to attempt to change first? And Richard has put that in the chat as well. Now that you've seen the do's and don'ts, which don't will you change first? And I'll let you guys chime in the chat, answer that question for me. I'm going to give you guys like 1 minute and then I'm going to move on. But I don't want to time you, of course. You can continue to write it when I move on. I see left side, yes. Not using center alignment, great. Yes, 2 ways to highlight. Oh, I love it. Thank you, Carla. That's my favorite little tip. Yeah, changing your headers, making sure they're not unclear. Changing each header for each slide. Oh, yes, good. And a couple people have said no use of mouse. Oh, I'm excited for you guys to try it out. Use the keyboard because it's just kind of fun to see what happens. Yeah, use a Word doc. Yeah, the feature to check for accessibility. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Awesome. Well, you are all great students. I used to teach middle school, and they were always really wild. So, usually I'm telling them to stop, putting gum under the desk or picking their nose. So I appreciate you guys. Okay. So I do want to tell you a little bit about screen readers and how they work, because this is the most common type of assistive technology that people who work in accessible design are designing for. So how screen readers work. A screen reader is an assistive technology that converts text and images on screen to speech or braille. Users can adapt screen readers to their specific needs, whatever they need. It could be speech could be faster or slower. They can use braille machines, which are so neat. They are so cool. And your local library probably has one if you ever wanted to check it out. Screen readers allow people to navigate websites, applications using speech or other non-visual output. And I wanted to give you an example because I want you to see how important it is to make sure that things are keyboard accessible. So this and making sure that a screen reader can use it. So often when using a screen reader, people will use a keyboard to help them navigate through it. The most often keys that people will use are tab, the arrow keys, and the H key. And that is why I kept on telling you guys why it isn't so important to have unique headers, because if you click on H, it'll take you to the next header. And that is a way for people to really easily navigate content without having to tab through every single thing. And I'm going to show you this video. It's just very short. I'm not going to show you the entire thing. I'm just going to show you an example of a website that's somewhat accessible. It's not perfectly accessible. And then I'm going to show you a website that is not accessible at all, so you can see the difference between the two. Let me make sure. I am worried that I don't have my sound shared. Give me 1 second. You guys will have to tell me. I'm going to press play and then give me a thumbs up if you see it, okay, Marie? Or if you hear it, not see it. Both, if you see it and hear it. All right.
I am on the Amazon.com website right now, and typically the first thing that I would do when I navigate on any website is use heading navigation. So navigate by the headings that are on the page. So I would do that by just hitting the letter H on my keyboard, and it just takes me through the headings that are on the page. So I'm going to hit H now.
0 today, heading level 2. Link S, heading level 2, 0 due today. Link S. Link shop deals with Prime, try before you buy. Link S. Link sweaters. Gifts for your Valentine, heading level 2.
So gifts for my Valentine.
Link sweaters. Link bags. Blank. Winter fashion finds, heading level 2.
So it's reading me, kind of, so the headings give you an idea of what content you should expect under that heading.
Blank, heading level 2, winter fashion finds.
So winter fashion finds. So the content that's under this heading should reflect that heading.
Link all fashion. Link women. Blank. Link men. Link kids. Blank. Valentine's Day gift cards, heading level 3. Link shop the selection. Top deal, heading level 2. Link graphic True Remedy Premium Organic Body Wash and Balm.
Whoops. Okay. Can you hear me again? So I'm going to pause it there. I just wanted to give you an example. That's Amazon. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this very popular website. As he pressed the H key, it went from 0 due today, and it went to sweaters, and then it skipped and went to gifts for your Valentine, right? So this design is slightly accessible. It's not completely, but for Zero Due today, he's only going to be able to check out sweaters. Shirts and jeans, I guess, aren't part of the deal, right? They won't know. Um, but yeah, so mostly though, this website itself is fairly accessible. Um, and a good example. I wanted you to hear it too, just to give you an idea what people are actually listening to when they're using screen readers and when they're tabbing through or using H. I'm going to now scroll way over here. I do recommend that you watch this full video just because it's such a great example. We're going to go to a website that is not accessible, and you might, you know, maybe not be surprised, but we're going to go to Dollar Tree.
Selected. Enter. https://www.dollartree.com-alert. Alert. Glass vases, party supplies, cleaning and more vertical bar dollartree.com. Okay. So again, what I'm going to do is do the same thing that I did for Amazon, and I'm going to navigate by heading here. So I'm going to go to my first heading. On the hunt for gifts, plan your next store trip, heading level 3. So it says on the hunt for gifts, plan your next store trip. Blank. Head over heels for DIYs. Visit our Value Seekers blog. Blank. List box. I'm going to hit headings again. Wrapping to top. On the hunt for gifts, plan your next store trip, heading level 3. Okay, so there's only one heading on this page. And because it's a retail site, I would think there would be significantly more headings to kind of break the content down into different sections, so it would be easier for me to understand and perceive what's happening on the page. So now, instead of, and I didn't do this really last time, but I'm going to have to use now arrow navigation from this one heading to try to understand what's happening on the page. Blank. Link graphic view local ad. Blank. Link checkout or ad. So one thing I've noticed is when I navigated before by heading to this, the content changed. It didn't read the same way. Before it read different information to me, but I'm going to continue to arrow down. Blank. Link graphic view and store specials. Blank. Link and dash store specials. Blank. Link graphic view item of the week. Blank. Link item of the week. Blank. List box. List box. List box. List box. List box. So I don't know really what's going on. List box. Link graphic 16-Uz glass sports mug with handle. Famous dash maker Pilsner glass. 20 link graphic gold plastic charger plate with beaded rim. Metallic silver plastic charger plate. And
Okay, so I wanted to just give you an example of how frustrating that would be for me. And I mean, continues to go through it, just showing you exactly how frustrating that can be, and why this is important. Nobody's gonna, obviously this is just Dollar Tree, but some of the content that you could be potentially making could, really help somebody. So that's why it's so important. There is an average of 51 accessibility errors on the homepage of the top 1 million websites. Even Amazon, all of them, they all have accessibility errors. And you will actually see this number has started to go down a little bit. And the reason for that is because in that terrible year of 2019, when everybody started to go home, we realized how important accessible content really is. At that point, I think it really, there was a real insurgence of need for accessible content. And you'll see that, which is a great thing, is that these numbers are going down after that realization. But it's still consistently an issue. And if you are aware of it or not, TikTok really has this, uh, it's really famous for like trend awareness or like trends that are happening. And sometimes those trends that are popular are not accessible in themselves. So you got to be really careful with that. There's a huge insurgence of 90s stuff coming back and 90s design, even with like web pages and things like that. People are wanting to kind of go back to those early designs, which are very inaccessible. So we don't want to have uh, you know, 1998 hamster dance on everybody's screen because it definitely will cause issues. Um, yes, and there's actually kind of a cool tool you can use to look at websites to see how they've changed. It's called the Wayback Machine, and you can see how they've changed, made their content more accessible as time has gone on. Jesse, yes, you have a question?
Again, I don't know why my camera is being wasting. That's fine. I'll figure it out later. So I just want to mention one thing. You, and it's to kind of investigate who the we is when we say we realized XYZ, that, the how important accessibility is or whatnot, because um, you know, advocacy communities, disability rights and justice organizations and groups and people have been talking about this for a long time. And so we really need to investigate, like, what do we mean when we say we didn't know? Like, who is that we and who does that include? And why is it that we didn't know?
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, thank you. So, and it's not that we didn't know, it's just that I think that there was just a rise in um understanding for the need because so many people had to switch gears and work at home from a computer. It's really what it was. And there's just been a lot more attention on it, which is great. But I mean, it's been a need for a very long time. Before we even had computers, it's obviously been a need. So it's always been a need,
Yeah,
right?
it kind of goes back to the beginning of like thinking about accessibility needs and which ones are normalized, and which ones are seen as
Like glasses are normalized, right?
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jesse. All right. Here are some quick tips. I know we went through a lot. And really, I don't expect there to be a complete change in everybody's content. It really takes time to learn a lot of these tricks and tips, and it also there are people that are in positions that um, work on accessibility to help you make accessible design. There are people that you work with that I'm sure are passionate about it, people that are willing to share information that you can seek out. But just some quick tips that are easy for you to take away today, for you to start making more accessible design. And really the most popular one, what you can really start doing is making sure you're using appropriate alternate text for images. Another thing is to ensure text contrast. There's you can just look up color contrast checkers. There's a lot of them available, and all of them work. It just depends on which one is good for you. There is a certain ratio of contrast that is more accessible and perceivable. I don't want anybody to think that making your design accessible means boring, because it doesn't mean that at all. You can still have design, you can still have color, you can still have images and make your design accessible. it really does, in a way, drive creativity and innovation because there are ways to make things accessible and still palatable. A lot of times people are like, oh, I don't want to make it accessible because then that means I need to make it boring. And that's just not true in any regard. It is not true. Um, Also provide alternatives for media content. So that means, text. That means provide PowerPoints. I know that you guys have asked for this PowerPoint, and you will be provided that PowerPoint after this presentation. You also want to label your forms properly. Make sure that you use the hierarchy structure in your content, like your headers, and use unique titles. Those are all really quick ways to start this journey if you're new to it. And people are generally, if they have any knowledge, are very excited and happy to share it with you. There are so many resources online that you can look up, and the tools that I want you guys to look into are Wave, Access Scan, Ally Color Contrast Accessibility Validator, and then, like I had referred to before, those Microsoft accessibility checkers are very useful and definitely a great starting point for you to begin making your content accessible. And yeah, and here are some resources for you to look into. WebAIM is the ultimate place to go. It is a hub and wealth of knowledge, and that is where I learned all of my stuff. Like, that's where I started. There are a lot of other resources that are great as well, but this is kind of like just the really concise way to look at it. It has the standards that many people will follow to make sure that their content is accessible. They have training, resources, tools. I just think it's just a wonderful place to begin a journey, or to also, um, you know, make, not just begin, but also just like solidify your journey. If you're, quite a bit about it already, there are things that are coming out all the time that are new. The Ally project is also kind of the same thing. It gives you like checklists, resources, and tips. I definitely recommend that as well. And if you have access to LinkedIn Learning, there are so many courses, and I've taken all of them because they are amazing. They're great. That'll just show you how to make things accessible, like your PDFs, your PowerPoints, everything. If you have access to LinkedIn Learning, I definitely suggest it. Jesse also provided another website for color contrast. There are quite a few of them, and like I said, all of them work fairly well. There's also like a little tool. There's like a little tool I like to use that's called it's called it's just like an eyedropper, and I use the eyedropper on any color on my screen, and then it will copy the color number for me that I can put in the checkers. So there's a whole bunch of little tools and tricks that will work differently for everybody. It just really depends on your preference. Excuse me. Oh, and this is the color contrast checker that I generally use. But Jesse shared another one. There are plenty of them. And then here are some screen reader examples, some other ones that I'm just sharing with you for you to check out, just to see what the difference is between the two. Just a little more context to what we've already covered. And I would like to now leave it over to you guys to give me some questions. Anything you guys have, please let me know. Yeah, you guys are welcome. And Sheila, I agree too. It makes the most beautiful products. It really does. You don't, you're not sacrificing design for accessibility. It makes it look so, it just makes it look all so much better for everybody. You're welcome, guys. And Jesse, thank you again so much for all your wonderful comments and questions. I really appreciate you chiming in and joining us in the conversation. I really do.
Absolutely. I also figured out what was happening with my camera. Teams
Oh,
was
there
trying to
you
use it at
are.
the same time. Uh, but yeah, no, I love contributing to conversations like this. Um, so yeah.
I'm so glad you joined us and added that valuable content. You just made me better. I really appreciate it.
So it looks like we have one question about how does accessibility come into play for folks who do not have access to internet or a personal computer? Is that outside the parameters of this webinar?
It is a little bit outside the parameters of the webinar because this is mostly internet content when we're dealing with things that we're showing through the internet. My specific area of expertise is with internet content, but like outside of that content context, when we're thinking about accessible design, there are people who do like they'll do things like looking for like ramps for wheelchairs or making sure that lighting is sufficient in certain rooms or corridors and making sure that noise is not distracting. But there is definitely and then if you're like we don't have access to internet or a personal computer, um, and you're trying to do like a presentation or something like that, people often can access stuff through their phone. A lot of time people will call in, like at a Zoom call or something like that. Jesse, did you have something to add to that?
I sure did. Uh, so one of the things that like I consider in my job is about like printables, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That link back to uh, an online resource, for example. And one of the issues that we've seen is this dependence on QR codes,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
Where if you do not have a phone or a
mhm.
way to scan that QR code, you don't have a way of getting access to that website later.
Right.
And so one way, because QR codes are so convenient, right? And they can also be an accessibility tool. It's again we need redundancy, which is a theme that you mentioned a lot. Is multiple ways of doing things. And so what I do is if the the link to the resource, for example, is not easy to remember by itself, then it's worth shortening and creating a custom backend.
Yeah.
So that way it is easy to remember. Um, so that way somebody can either write it down quickly or just remember it and then go to the library where you get free internet access and access to a computer, or can easily type it into their phone, if they want to use their phone. But maybe uh, their camera is broken or something, right? Lots of reasons why a QR code, even with a phone, isn't accessible. So, um, yeah, I think a lot about like print materials and linking back to digital
Mhm.
resources and how
Yeah.
how do you access digital resources when like because a lot of my work is in really rural areas of Pennsylvania, and so um, internet connection is real shoddy sometimes, and so provide like um, medical providers need print resources to hand out, and so what do you do to make sure that people who need that information on that resource can access it more fully, or more in depth by going online.
Yeah. And I think too, like presenting, if you're presenting in person, there are definitely ways to make your presentation more accessible as well. It depends on what you're doing. Like when I taught in a classroom, I taught a lot of people that needed assistive technology, but the assistive technology was like given to me. So I had like a little, like a ear thing and like a microphone. And so that made me a lot louder so everybody could hear. And um, nobody knew who it was for, but all of the kids loved it. They were like, whoa, it's like a TED Talk in here every day. I love it so much. And it actually elevated my teaching, even though it was just for one specific person that nobody knew who it was, but
Mhm.
it elevated the learning experience for everyone. Um, there's also like when you have a slideshow presentation, I always printed out slides and handed them to my students on their desk as well. Making sure you touch base with people, communicate with people, get on their level, that kind of thing. Make sure you make a space that's safe so that people feel like comfortable to tell you their needs. But yeah, there's a lot of different things like that.
I think one of the other really important things that you just mentioned is about, you know, it, fitting into a framework of targeted universalism, right? Where when you make when you design something for the people with the highest level of needs, everybody benefits. And so, like, the including the microphone, um, but the even a step beyond that would be using a microphone, even if there weren't somebody who
Oh, I
had
did.
made it known, right?
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people who, would benefit from just having amplified voice,
Mhm.
even if they haven't gone through a formal process of declaring a disability and asking for accommodations, because there are a lot of reasons why just that is inaccessible,
Yep.
actually, right? There's a high bar for that so frequently. Ask me how I know. And there are probably a lot of people who also don't realize that they would benefit from that. And
Absolutely.
so once it's in place, they will benefit even if they didn't think that they would need to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I needed, so for example, I'm going to give this mic example again, but I needed it for one student 1 hour of the day, but I used it all day, every single hour, because I noticed the difference that it really caused. And not only for people who have hearing, um, that need better hearing, like hearing assistance, but for people who have ADHD even, like it really caught their attention, right? It really helped.
I was
With
just about to say,
yeah,
yeah, like having that different quality of voice would absolutely help me like focus in on that, even if there are other like, side conversations happening, ADHD as well. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Just as we had talked about QR codes, here is an example of one, but also if the QR code does not work, we have a link below it, and also the link has been posted in the chat as well for you to access it.
Thank you, Rachel, so much.
Welcome.
Um, yes, please fill out the evaluation. Again, you can look in the chat, you can look on the screen. You'll also get a follow-up request. And I'm going to navigate to other resources. So, yes, this is being recorded. We have recorded this. It will get cleaned up a little bit and posted on our website along with the handout and the PowerPoint. So give us a little bit of time to get that all in good shape. But please check out our website, join our mailing list, check out other products and resources that we have. Um, Great, thank you, Wanda. So your certificates of completion will be emailed with materials next week. So you'll hear back from us. And I hear you also have multiple ways to contact us. So Wanda, anything else that I need to make sure that we let folks know about?
I don't think so, Marie. You covered everything. I think, all the certificates, materials, they'll be out in about 7 days. The recordings will arrive with that. If you have any problems with the certificate, just respond to us at any one of the communication that you've received about this event. That will go to our PTTC email. And we'll make sure you get set up.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we hope that you have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Yes.
Bye. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Rachel.